So I was minding my own business in the grocery store when I heard a sickening sound. It was like a on the ground, and I knew this wasn't normal. And I looked down the aisle to see what it was, and I saw this elderly woman laying on her back. And I thought, this is not what I want to find. So I went running down the aisle to check on her to see if she was okay. When I got there, she had her eyes open, and I leaned over and peered into them to make sure that she wasn't concussed. But I could see, I mean, she was pretty scared. She was afraid. She was really uncertain about what had happened. So I leaned down and I started talking to her, told her my name, started asking her some questions. And as I did that, a horrible thing started happening. A pool of blood started appearing behind her head. And at that point, I grabbed the checker and I said, "You need to call 911." And I brought my attention back to her. And my whole goal was to try to make her feel comfortable, even though something terrible had happened. And I could see she was a little confused and uncertain. And I started just to talk to her about who I was and who she was and asking her to tell me some things about her. While this was happening, an even worse thing happened than the blood behind her head. You see, she was near the registers, and people actually walked up to her. They saw what was happening, and they stepped over her body so they could get to the register. And I didn't really know what to do. I was trying to care for her, and I was completely flabbergasted by how these people behaved. I mean, it was like she wasn't a mom, she wasn't somebody's daughter, she wasn't a grandma. It was like she wasn't even human. It broke my heart. But I realized this is actually a metaphor for what we see happening in our culture today. You see, we're more divided than ever. And what's happening about our divisions is we're actually treating each other like objects that we need to step over, that we need to avoid. And we do this by calling each other names. We label people, we lump them into categories that we could just easily just say, oh, we need to avoid those kinds of people. And what's happening is it's creating more and more polarization and problems in our society. And it's easy to do. I want you to think about it. Who have you given yourself permission to step over? Is it somebody you don't like? Somebody you don't agree with? Somebody on the other side of the political aisle? Maybe a more challenging question is to think about who stepped over you. It hurts. It's not something we want to do to one another, and yet we do it. And here in Hawkesbury, we're talking about mind engineering. And in order to address the divisions that we face, we have to engineer, or maybe even re-engineer our minds in order to be authentically human. See, our brains are really complex, right? They've helped us get to the moon. They help us create masterpieces. They're these beautiful things, but they're also very primitive and simple in some ways. And one of the ways is that we have a thing in our brain. It's a little tiny organ. It's called the amygdala. It's a little part of your brain. And that little part of your brain can hijack the whole thing. It's called your fight or flight response. Now, it worked great for our ancestors, right? You're facing something. Maybe it was a saber-toothed tiger. No, but you were facing it and you said, okay, I'm either going to clench my fist and clench my jaw and get ready to fight, or I'm going to run like as fast as I can, or at least faster than the guy next to me. Or, if you're like me, you freeze and fall over like a fainting goat. It's not one of my proudest things to do. But it's happening in a way that helped us. And now, the same thing that used to occur in an ancient way is still occurring to us, but it's happening on a daily basis. And it's happening in spite of technology's promise to connect us. We're more disconnected than ever. If you look at your Facebook feed or any social media, or really any media at all, what you don't realize, or you may realize, is that there are algorithms at work. And what they're doing is they're showing you exactly what they think you want to see. So the more that you are on there, the more that you dive in, the more it shows you everything that you agree with. And pretty soon you think, well, the whole world agrees with me. And those people who don't, well, they're idiots. There's something wrong with them. And we objectify them. when we see those algorithms, our brain kicks in and we go back to fight or flight. And we wind up being in a constant state of fear and anxiety, concern and confusion. And we were never meant to live like this. I mean, we're not supposed to live in this radically divided world that we live in. It's counterintuitive and it's inauthentic to humanity. So, how do we overcome this? Well, I believe the answer lies in the power of dignity. And dignity is the inherent worth of every human being. It comes from the word dignitas, which means value or worth. And it's this idea that if you are human, you have value. You have within you something that no one else can take away and no one can reduce. It's part of being human. And it has the power to transform lives. So dignity isn't just an idea or a word. It's a power that's at work that can change you, and it can change your workplaces, and it can change societies. And I experienced the power of dignity when I was in junior high. I mean, I grew up with a massive overbite. Okay, my teeth were out to here, pretty close. And so wherever I went, my teeth arrived about 30 seconds before I did. It was wonderful. And you know how kids are. Kids are terrible. So, of course, they pointed out the fact that I had these enormous teeth and this giant overbite, and they objectified me and they bullied me. And it wasn't long before I started believing what they had to say about me. So by the time I was about, junior high, I hated who I was. I didn't like myself, and I had contemplated suicide. And in order to deflect, I used humor and I used to screw around all the time. It would get me in trouble in class. And I remember I had a teacher, Mr. Jones, and he did something that helped kind of change the course of my life. And one particular day in class, I was acting out and being silly, got sent out into the hallway, which is not a great way to increase your academic career. I'm out in the hallway, and Mr. Jones came out, and instead of choosing to distance himself from me or to punish me, instead of just stepping over me because I was a problem, he actually stepped towards me. He said, "Hey, Bob, I got something simple for you to do." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Come with me." We went into a classroom. He said, "I got a piece of paper." He said, "I want you to write down everything on this piece of paper that you like about yourself." And I was like, "What? That's weird." So I thought about it for a minute, and I came up with literally like two things. And Mr. Jones reaches in his pocket, takes out a piece of paper, and he put it on the table, and he had a list that was half the page. I couldn't believe it. I thought, no way. Mr. Jones saw who I was past my behavior. He imparted my dignity to me and validated that in a way that I could not believe. And I've seen this power at work over and over again as I sit with other people. And when people find out they're more than their past, or they're more than their titles, they're more than they think they are, or the mistakes they've made, it's like an avalanche of change comes to their lives. They start believing in something so much bigger than themselves. And this happens with societies as well. What we know is that when dignity is part of a society's DNA, they're able to overcome challenges so much better because they're united in a way that other people aren't. And dignity helps at the workplace. People who experience this in the workplace stick around. There's less turnover. There's better culture. There's more camaraderie. There's more creativity. All because you value and appreciate and validate the dignity of the people around you. Interestingly, dignity helps with conflict. Dr. Donna Hicks from Harvard University has written 2 books that I commend to you on dignity and its role that it plays in conflict. And that can be on a societal level or interpersonally. And dignity also helps with mental health, where people have a deeper sense of belonging and who they are. And honestly, that's where dignity helped me so much. I was so grateful. So the power of dignity has a capability for us to change and to change us. and to change those around us. And the question is, like, how do we go about that? And I think of it in terms of 3 steps, and I think of it in terms of TAP: thinking, acting, and practicing. The first thing we have to do in re-engineering our minds is that when we're tempted to step over somebody, when we're tempted to treat them like an object, we have to stop and think about our thoughts. The Human Genome Project tells us that each human being is 99% the same as the other human being. So all of you looking at me, and I'm looking at all of you, we share over 99% of our DNA. We have way more in common than we have that separates us. And part of our thinking that has to change is the fact that we're united in ways that we maybe are uncomfortable with, but that we are. And that unity can bring about empathy, and empathy can bring about change. We have to change how we act. We have to create environments where dignity can flourish. And what that looks like is actually listening to people. In our culture, listening is almost a lost art. Instead, as soon as somebody thinks they disagree, they start shouting. So that person can't speak and no one else can hear. Maybe you've seen it. Or how about creating environments where people feel like they're connected instead of the object of derision? Or what about saying something like, we can disagree, but that doesn't mean I hate you. Dignity fosters a way of being together that strengthens us and that can transform what we're a part of, whether it's at work or at home or even on the bigger picture. We also need to put into practice dignity on a consistent basis. And practice means it's not perfection, right? Practicing dignity is one of the deepest challenges that we have, because it's easy for us to look in the mirror and say something poor about who we are. And if we're going to practice dignity, we actually have to be the kinds of people who are willing to tell the truth about us and accept the truth about who we are. And that means that we're masterpieces, that we're unique, and that in the history of humanity, you will never exist and neither will I ever again. When you think about what it means to be human, we're all similar, 99.9%. But when it comes to you, there will never be another you. No one is going to have your laugh. You get to make an impact in a way that no one else can. No one else has your fingerprint. No one else is going to leave the mark that you leave on life. Practicing dignity gives us the opportunity that when we see somebody else and we're tempted to step over them, we recognize ourselves in them. And it changes how we do things. So when we decide to think and act and practice with dignity, we have an opportunity to close the gap that exists between us and stop the polarizing that's going on in our culture. Now, I want to take you back to the elderly woman that I was with in the grocery store. She did not care that I was male. She didn't care that I'm a Christian. She didn't care that I'm American. She didn't care about any of those things. She cared that I cared. And she cared that I treated her with dignity. And that gal and I are 99% the same. And I wanted to treat her like that. And my promise to you is that I will treat you that way as well. And I hope that you will join me in doing this, because I believe that dignity wins. And that's not just an idea worth spreading, it's a life worth leading. Thank you.